In case you somehow have not heard of Grounded, Grounded is the documentary that was done on the creation of The Last of Us Part 2 or Part 1. It was released 9 years ago, and it's an hour and a half long. I can't talk today. And it's just a documentary breaking down how they built the game. Really straightforward, but it is fascinating. Everything from the development process of like balancing memory within these different scenes to behind the scenes clips of them filming the motion capture stuff for some of the most iconic scenes in video game history, to the musical creation and ideation process and writing the music and recording it, matching it to the scenes, how they did sound effects, how they paced certain combat encounters, how the art direction works. Really, really fascinating. Young Neil Druckmann with the long hair. See what I mean? He looked way better with the long hair, in my opinion. But they just announced that they're doing a sequel. I freaking love this. They also did it for God of War 2018. They did the Raising Kratos documentary, which I thought was also fantastic. And I hope that they keep doing this with big releases, that they film these documentaries and release them, because I find the whole process fascinating, and I think you learn to appreciate it a lot more. If this is what I think it is, we're probably going to see like discussions within the studio of them talking about some of these big plot points and how it would be received by the audience and stuff. This could be really, really fascinating. In 2016, filming began to document the development of The Last of Us Part 2. Trademark.
This is the longest, most ambitious game in the studio's history. That's a big challenge to take on.
Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the documentary was abandoned. No!
The Last of Us was this beloved game that won all these awards.
So many people were like, Last of Us 1 is perfect. They shouldn't make a sequel.
My hope is it's going to make the first game even greater.
That's the thing I love about the beginning of a project. It's like, it's all optimism. This is going to be the game that I always dreamed about making.
And then, anybody going to tell them how the story ends? I also find this fascinating. I don't know if it's just me, but I always geek out when I see the videos of the actual like studios, because I don't know, when you think it's like almost with movies, when we went to tour Lightstorm Entertainment, which is the studio that made or makes the Avatar films, to do that Ubisoft press event for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. It was really cool because we're walking through like James Cameron's studio, and they just casually mentioned like, okay, we're going to go over to Studio 6 or whatever it was for lunch. And then we go in there and they have like all the catering set up. And they're like, yeah, by the way, this is where they filmed most of Avatar 1. It's like, what do you mean? This soundstage. Like, this is where they filmed it. They set up the motion capture stuff. Pretty much anything that wasn't in the water, they filmed here. So all the actors came, they got their motion capture suits, and this is where the movie was made, right here. And then all the data was set off to Weta Digital in New Zealand, and they did their magic over there. But this is where it all kind of started and happened. It's like, oh, I guess you just assume, because it's like this huge movie, this huge thing that everybody knows about, you just kind of assume that it's going to be more magical and ethereal and mystical, and like, oh, you walk in and you get the goosebumps because this is where the magic was made. But it's actually sometimes much more humble than you expect. And in the case of video game development, it's like, it's usually a bunch of cubicles and then teams of people sitting in those cubicles working on stuff together. And it can sometimes be a little less magical than you might expect, which is just funny to me. It's just surprising. I freaking love this stuff. But this is also one thing I've talked about it before. I've had a number of people reach out and they work on these games. I won't be too specific about it because, of course, I think they could potentially get in trouble if their bosses found out that they were talking to a YouTuber. But I've had devs from Naughty Dog, from Santa Monica, from Insomniac, many from Ubisoft. I've had them reach out to me privately. And a lot of them have said, I really like working from home, but honestly, I think we're way more productive when we're in the studio. They're like, I'm not going to tell my boss that because I really like sleeping in and being able to work in my PJs, but I think we get a lot more done when we're in the studio. And that kind of makes sense to me. Like, I don't know. I'm one of those people. I work better when I'm around people, when I have that group accountability to be productive. I personally do better work when I'm in those groups. I know some people swear that they work better and more productively at home, but it's just interesting. It's just really, really interesting how it blends. But a lot of these studios are pushing now for all of these devs to come back into the studio and to work in person. They had to work remote during COVID, and it makes sense why they had to delay the documentary, because shocker, it's probably pretty hard to film a documentary while everybody's working from home. Like, what's the documentary going to be? Just a bunch of screen caps of Zoom calls? Like, it's a lot less magical than going through the studio and seeing the people talk to each other and take notes on different things. Like, it's a much less exciting to film a documentary during that. But yeah, this is, I think, one of the benefits though of working in the studio in person is that the teams can work together. If this person runs into an issue, they can turn to their coworker here and just ask them for their opinion. Whereas working remote, you have to schedule a call or send them Slack messages, hope that they respond quickly enough. You know, it's just like it's a whole process. Every studio is a little bit different, but it seems to me that there's a general consensus, at least among producers, that, you know, make the schedules and timelines and track productivity on these projects. It seems that there's a consensus that working in studio seems to be a little bit more productive for the overall team. You could say that it also makes you much more likely to suffer abuses like overworking, crunch, things like that. And that is absolutely the case, because when you're working remote, it's like, yeah, you can't make me stay at the office till 10 tonight. I'm at home already. I'm logging off because my workday's over. It's much easier to keep that proper barrier between you and your boss when you have that physical separation. But when you're working in the studio, I'm sure it's much easier to get guilt tripped into staying and working late.
Let's do something new. Let's take risks. Let's kill Joel right away. Let's just kill him.
Yeah, I was like, what? Yeah,
Let's just kill him.
This is going to be the game that I always dreamed about making.
Let's do something new. Let's take risks. Let's kill Joel right away. Let's just kill him.
Yeah, I was like, what? Yeah, let's do it.
You're gonna piss a lot of people off. This scope on this game is extraordinary.
I'm confident in the game if we finish it. I'll be frank, it's not looking great.
I'm feeling burned out. I can't crunch like I used to.
We started having these leaks.
It was awful. There were a lot of days where I would just cry.
And then there's these rumblings of this pandemic.
Are people going to want to play a game that takes place in a pandemic when there's a real pandemic? Ever going to finish this game?
It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Keep the faith. When we come together, when we do this thing that people outside the studio talk about, like this Naughty Dog magic, this is what it looks like.
Or Joel doesn't die. So then what happens is all of us become friends.
Can you imagine? If they just like casually, actually it was all a dream, and everybody's sitting around a campfire playing drums and singing Kumbaya. It'd be amazing. Oh, that would be funny. Because it's at times I've wondered that when people talk about The Last of Us Part 2 and they're like, yeah, the writing was terrible. I'm like, what is your pitch? What moves the story forward? What's true to the world and the universe and the characters? Like as far as I can tell, in the world of The Last of Us, Joel's comeuppance was coming. It was comeupping. Okay? Like, he had lived a pretty aggressive life, killed many, many people, and that's not even including the stuff he did for 20 years between the initial events of the outbreak and when we reconnect with him at the start of The Last of Us Part 1. He made lots and lots and lots and lots of enemies. Anybody else in that world, their story probably doesn't have a very happy ending, because that's just what's true to the universe. That's what's true to the world. And so I'm like, how would you write it? And how would you continue that story? Maybe their answer is just don't continue it, leave it there. And that is honestly very fair. Sometimes it feels like a lot of artists and writers get themselves into trouble by trying to continually add on to stuff when a story has already been told. And honestly, sometimes details are best left unrevealed. Sometimes the story that people build in their imaginations to fill in the gaps is better than if you were to tell it to them directly. And I think there is a real argument to be made that in the case of The Last of Us Part 2, the story would be like, I think the story of Joel and Ellie came to a conclusion where the players could fill in the gaps and question, for years and years after, do you think Ellie and Joel ever got into a fight over him lying to her about the Fireflies? Do you think she just accepted and forgave him? Because that's the whole point of the last, okay, from Ellie at the very end of the game. Like, do you think that ever happened? How do you think they balanced that out? And honestly, leaving it up to the players to just think about it and ponder it might have been a better option than trying to show them what happened. And you could still do a sequel spin-off game. You could do that, just, telling Abby's story, but tweaked, maybe without a Joel, but with a different character in that position. And I think it still would have been pretty successful. I think people would have been much more stoked on it. There would have been a lot of, I know everybody jokes about Abby, but you remember Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil Village? I think you'd have a lot of people simping for Abby if they hadn't started out with the negative opinion of her, thanks to the leaks and everything that happened there that kind of falsely framed the story and what happened with it. We were watching a trailer for a game recently or something like that, or maybe we were looking at an older game, and there was a very buff woman in the trailer, and somebody in chat goes, "Oh man, I'd let her squish my head like a watermelon between her thighs." I was like, oh my God. I think there would have been a lot of people like that for Abby if they hadn't started so negative towards her thanks to the leaks. I really do think that could have happened. It would have been really funny. But yeah, it's a whole thing. Lily Love, Last of Us 2 didn't hit as much as the first. Well, in some ways it hit more. Thank you. I'll be here all night. I wonder what would have been if the other creator from the first had remained. Bruce Straley. Bruce was just gameplay. He was the gameplay director. So he likely would not have had any real impact on the way the story played out. That was all Neil. Neil was the creative director. He handled the story, and Bruce Straley was the gameplay side of things. He probably would have offered his opinions and his 2 cents and tossed that into the ring, but I don't think that it necessarily would have been completely altered, frankly. Let's see. Ridley Scott, I think that Luke is talking about your Alien franchise and leaving things untouched. Yeah, Fiery Phoenix. Yeah, there's sometimes, and a handful of filmmakers have discussed it, and like another great example is George Lucas and Disney with Star Wars. A lot of the Star Wars troubles have just been created by showing too much and trying to tell stories nobody asked for and nobody wanted. And sometimes that can be admirable because you're telling a story and expanding the universe in a lot of ways. And other times I just think it's too much trouble. I am yet to have a conversation with somebody defending the writing in that game without the person falling into concerning Palpatine. Good is a point of view, Anakin. Levels of moral relativism. Well, Skeptical Buckerman, I think the whole point of The Last of Us Part 2, like you're saying, is that for heroes specifically, heroes are often defined by perspective. In the case of Joel, you view Joel as the hero because of The Last of Us Part 1 and you going on that journey with him. The moment you flip the perspective, Joel is a murderous lunatic who comes in and massacres dozens and dozens and dozens of people to save a girl that didn't want to necessarily be saved. Though to be fair, she didn't really get to offer her 2 cents in it, but still, he kills dozens and dozens and dozens of people to save one girl who's close to him, even though she could have potentially saved humanity. And so he's seen from that perspective as a murderous lunatic who is extremely selfish, which I think, even in some of the cutscenes from The Last of Us Part 1, Joel would probably agree that he is being extremely selfish by saving Ellie instead of like if he really wanted to do what was best for Ellie, and if he wanted to respect her, he would have left it up to her. He would have asked her, or they would have, he would have tried to find some way of asking her if she wanted to go through with this. I don't think anybody could have allowed that. And the Fireflies, the moment that they opened that up, it could have caused problems. But, they could have had a scene where he holds Marlene at gunpoint and says, ask her if this is what she wants. Ask her. And then they wake her up from the anesthesia and she can either consent or whatever. And, at least then he could respect her wishes. But that was never a concern for them. Let's see. Do you think there's a good shot we'll get a part 3 or no? I don't know if I should still be excited for it in the back of my head or not. It's tricky because they've previously said, and I think it was Neil Druckmann who said it, The Last of Us is the story of Joel and Ellie. The Last of Us is Joel and Ellie. So you can't have The Last of Us without Joel and Ellie, at least one of them. And if they still hold to that, that to me gets me excited because it makes me think The Last of Us Part 3 could be an exploration of Joel and Tommy's time between the initial outbreak and the events of the first game, and then also maybe an exploration following Tommy's story after The Last of Us Part 2, where maybe he continues to chase down Abby or something. I don't know. But there's a lot of potential there. So it could be interesting. I don't know how they pace that well, and how that works as a part 3 that's not actually part 3. I'm not sure. Yeah, Joel lied and gaslit his adopted daughter for selfish reasons, I would say, and that means he's not a good dad. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Swagbag, I think that's the interesting dynamic. There are no true heroes. There's no guarantee if Ellie's death would be or for a cure would have worked. Yeah, and I think one of the core problems with the original game is that there wasn't a clear answer. Like, it wasn't clear if Ellie were to die that it would mean that a cure was made. In The Last of Us Part 2, it feels like they kind of rewrote it a little bit to make it clear, like, no, he's able to make a cure. Abby's dad could definitely have done it if he hadn't been murdered. Definitely could have done it. But instead, in the first game, it doesn't actually play that way. If you read the audio or if you listen to the audio tapes and read the logs and stuff, it doesn't play that way. There's a big question mark around it. Whereas in The Last of Us Part 2, they kind of just imply that it's guaranteed that it would have worked. So I don't know how you balance those. Rango, thank you for the 2. Joel deserved it. Oh, get ready, Rango. People are going to come at you. And Take, thank you also for the 2. It wasn't about Joel dying. It was about how he died. Yeah, but I mean, again, in the context of writing the characters, if you're saying that like you would have preferred Abby go about it a different way, I think the way she went about it made sense in the context of her character, the hatred she felt for Joel, blaming him for massacring her friends and for killing, I don't know if she was friends with the guards that died, but at least people that she was familiar with, and then killing her father. I think it makes sense that she would want to really make him suffer like she had suffered. So I think in the context of her character, it made sense. The fact it was so uncomfortable to witness and watch, I think is the point. Because they wanted to give the player the same hatred that Ellie was feeling and that Abby had felt after her dad was murdered. The whole point is that they're trying to create a mirrored story where Ellie feels hatred for Abby for killing her dad in front of her and seeing the body and everything. That they wanted Ellie to have the same feelings that Abby had and then slam them together and be like, see, everything sucks. And in that capacity, I think it worked. But it does make you question, like, it's not a feel-good story. Doesn't make you feel good. Makes you real sad by the end of it. Tell you what. My stance with all of it is that if people are looking for a game that's fun and makes them feel good, yeah, The Last of Us Part 2 is not going to be it. And it's a game I don't blame people for not enjoying, because honestly, it's not very enjoyable. It's kind of miserable to play. And I think that's a totally valid criticism. Just totally valid, I think. You don't have to like it. And in a lot of ways, the game is almost committed to making you not like it. In a lot of ways. Like, they want you to just feel miserable the whole time. And that is a frustrating thing when you buy a video game to try and like enjoy. Because you're probably not going to enjoy it. The gameplay, I still insist, is incredible. Graphically, it was ahead of its time also. But yeah, it's not an enjoyable game, I don't think, which is frustrating because I think The Last of Us Part 1 still had a satisfying arc to the story, kind of a happy-ish ending, whereas every part of The Last of Us Part 2 just makes you want to just stop. So I think that's totally valid. Is it still an artistic masterpiece? I would say so. I think it achieved exactly what it was trying to do. I think it's a technological masterpiece as well. But it's one of those masterpieces I don't blame people for hating. I think it makes sense that a lot of people don't like it. If that makes sense. I know it's confusing. Yeah, it will not lift you out of your depression. Yeah, it will probably make you feel worse, frankly. He took my thing.